A Dark Night in Bossing Say. Case 1. A Dark Night at the University. By MuffinLance. Read by My Lost and Found. Chapter 4. Zuko gets escorted from the library. Wan Shi Tong, Lee says, narrowing his eyes up at the giant spirit owl thing. The giant looming spirit owl thing. The giant looming mouth bigger than their heads spirit owl thing. Blue spirit? The owl replied. That was not the identity reveal Ryo had been expecting. Mei Lin swung her legs in her chair, diligently filling in the few kanji she knew. This put her ahead of all the others, who were still talking about boys. Talking about Lee as if he were a boy with a body that they had looked at. And the Jin girl who was supposed to be helping them was as red as a cherry beet. She wouldn't have to be uncomfortable if she would just focus. What does this mean? Mei Lin asked, pointing a line out to her brother. Wait a second, he said, but not to her. He was leaning forward, his arms on the table, and the Jin girl was sinking lower in her seat and making a kind of dying puffer ferret noise. Are you telling me you've been trying to flirt for weeks by asking his advice on tea selections? Wow, said Song, leaning back in her own chair. You know him even less than we do. He works at a tea shop, Jin said, her hands back over her face. His uncle is a tea master. Wouldn't he have opinions about tea? He sure does, said Song, patting the other girl's shoulder. Mei Lin stared down at her paper again. The kanji stared back up at her, unchanged. She could read every third one, every fifth. Mei Lin was on page 2. Of 12. Mei Lin stood up and marched to the desk of that twitchy officer, the one who had been watching Lee and making a list. Mei Lin helped herself to his desk drawers. Evidence, she read, her finger carefully tracing under one character at a time. You stole from me, Lee shouted, at the giant owl spirit. An unfamiliar feeling, I am sure, the giant owl spirit replied. You are trespassing. Leave. Okay, Ryo Chojio said, because he was not going to yell at the giant owl spirit. But there was a problem with that, and it was in the fact that the staircase they'd just tumbled down now appeared to be a solid rock wall, and scrambling against it wasn't doing anything, but making it look like when he'd still been stress chewing them, before he'd learned that keeping his lists and leaving teeth marks on the end of his writing brushes was a way better outlet. How do we do that, sir? The giant, angry owl spirit was not paying attention to Rochojio. Possibly because Lee was... Oh, spirits! Lee was poking it in its feathery chest. Give it back! Give everything back! The giant owl spirit got gianter, and Ryo wasn't sure if that was a thing it was doing with its feathers, or if it could just grow, especially in the neck. It had a very snaky neck, actually. Wow, that was still growing, but slowly enough that he wasn't actually sure if it hadn't been that way all along, except for how very sure he was that it definitely hadn't been like that all along, because if it had been like that all along, he'd have started screaming before now. Not that he was screaming now, clawing at the wall even harder seemed more productive. Ryo got right on that.
Leave,
the giant owl spirit repeated, its neck curving up and over and then back down until it was just about snapping its beak in Lee's hair. No! The little fox that had started all this was quietly skulking away, still dragging the framed picture it had stolen. Oh, to be a small, unnoticed animal. Oh, right. Ryo was. It was not actually reassuring to be in the presence of a creature that could just ignore a whole human, save him for later, as it were.
Leave,
it said a third time. And did owls eat their prey whole? He was remembering that, right? Because maybe Lee shouldn't be standing directly below it, glaring up, like it didn't put him in a prime swallow-in-one-bite position. No! The owl's beak parted further, kind of in a satisfied way, and its feathers smoothed down in a kind of smug way. Ryo hadn't known that feathers could be smug.
3 warnings I have given you. 3 warnings you did not heed. Let no other spirit, no matter their claim upon you, say I did not try.
Try to what? Lee scowled. But that beak was opening wider, and that neck was coiling back, and oh hey, they were running now. Yes, they were. Ryo's hand was gripped around Lee's, because Lee had thought they were fighting now. But Ryo had spent his first few days as a guard working out a flow chart on when to fight and when to run, and this was definitely a running situation. It was fortunate, after getting his hat snapped clear off his head, that Lee agreed. Less fortunate that he was faster than Ryo. This was not the sort of situation where one wanted to be the slowest. Fortunate, again, that for some reason, Lee had grabbed his hand back and was now dragging him. The owl came careening after them. There were shelves, lots of shelves. Was this a library? Why was there a giant owl in a library? And there were halls, and a huge central area that would really favor something that could fly. So yep, they turned around out of there real fast and dodged into the next hall, and oh wow, Ryo was regretting not doing more than the bare minimum to make sure he passed the guard's annual physical, and it would really, really suck to die thinking about how cold the doctor's stethoscope was. Giant owls were really fast. Giant owls were really big. Giant owls nearly knocked a book off one of the shelves with one of their giant wings, and made an extremely distressed sound, and paused to carefully push it back in. In there, Ryo panted, and yanked them into one of the little rooms they'd been passing, one with lots and lots of freestanding shelves. They wound through them, and the owl wound after, just barely fitting between. One of the shelves wobbled, and it straight up stopped, and hopped more delicately than anything that large should be able to, on top of the shelves. Its great taloned feet were nearly silent as it stalked them from above. Ryo gripped the front of the blue spirit shirt, and they both stayed very, very still as they huddled in an empty gap on a lower shelf. The owl's shadow passed over. Green eyes met gold. They very quietly crawled out and slipped out the door. In the hallway ahead, the little fox was just dragging his stolen picture around another corner. Lee bolted after. Ryo followed, because he did not want to be alone in a giant owl spirit's stomach. why did it smell like smoke? Oh, because someone had tried to burn the place. Zuko stopped, stared, because they just dashed past shelf upon shelf of Earth Kingdom records, had raced through a hall of Water Tribe carvings on great curving bones, had lost Wan Shi Tong in a room of carefully rolled Air Nomad scrolls, which obviously implied that there would be a Fire Nation section. He just hadn't expected it to be so stunningly representative of recent history. Someone had done their best to burn this entire wing to the ground. The shelves were caved in, crumbling to charcoal on the ground. Wherever scrolls had been, there were dust. "Who would do this?" Zuko asked. Replied a fox, with a dustpan in its mouth. Another was working diligently to sweep up the ash, one tiny pile at a time. "So, Ryo-Chojio said, doubled over, in between his gasping breaths. "Do you know the giant owl?" "It's Wan Shi Tong," Zuko said, taking another step in. Fire had licked up the walls, warping the inland tiles nearly past recognition. A dragon's head crested from the ash, like it was rising above. Or like it had been beheaded. "He who knows 10,000 things. He's the knowledge spirit who runs this library." "Aren't owls actually really stupid?" Ryo said. The fox with the dustpan coughed. The fox with a little broom between its teeth, face now covered in a layer of cough-puffed ash, glared at it. "I figured it ate whoever the real librarian was," Ryo added, and the first fox dropped its dustpan to wheeze. "His face is on all of the motifs," Zuko pointed out, with literal pointing. The rookie officer followed his finger to one of the many, many carved owl heads on the room's supporting columns. "So it is," he agreed. "So is it legal for him to eat us, since we're in his library?" There was one carefully cleared corner, with one tiny bookshelf. Zuko stalked past the foxes, the second now whacking its wheezing friend over the head with the bristles of its broom, and stopped. "I do not know how spirit laws work," Ryo said. "Do you think they have a book about it? Would it be longer or shorter than the one for Ba Sing Se's ordinances? We are so far out of our jurisdiction." Zuko reached out, hesitated, his fingers nearly touching, before he checked them to make sure he hadn't picked up any ash. And then he picked up his mother's copy of Love Amongst the Dragons, and turned to glare at the foxes. "You better not snitch." The one with the broom paused, whacked its friend one more time, then shook its head. "Stop!" the other one said to itself, and dissolved back into its wheezing. Ryo was shoving something down his shirt by the time Zuko looked back. That would have been more suspicious if Zuko hadn't been hugging his mother's play to his own chest. "How do we get out of here?" Zuko asked the foxes. The one with the broom shrugged, but there was a trail through the ash, deeper into the burnt wing, the prints of a fox kit, and the line where a portrait's frame had been dragged. It was dark as they went, and getting darker. Whoever had done for this place had made the fire so hot it had even cracked the library's glow rocks. Ryo stuck close to Lee's back, because being close to footsteps was a lot better than being close to Skitters. Even when the probably prince held his hand out, palm up, and absolutely nothing happened. No bending in the spirit realm. Right. Zuko snuck a glance back at Ryo, but it had been dark and the rookie wasn't even looking his way, so probably he hadn't caught the gesture, which hadn't made any flames anyway, so it was fine. Zuko crouched down next to a slightly less charred piece of bookshelf and took out his spark rocks. When he'd blown the little embers into a halfway decent flame at its top, he stood again. They had exactly 1 moment of proper light, exactly 1 moment to take in the reflection of eyes bigger than they were. "No fire in the library," the thing said, from a round face of fur and teeth. Then it reached down a hand with long, black, sharp talons and snuffed the flame. "Sorry," Ryo whispered into the darkness. "Humans these days," the thing grumped. Long fur brushed over Zuko's face as it lumbered past the way they'd come. The rookie officer was pressed up against his back. "Do you know that one?" Zuko cleared his throat. "No." "Great," said Ryo. They kept moving. Ahead, the darkness lightened until they could see the same rack of shelves again. They exited into another hall, one with working glow rocks. They both stood there, silent and blinking. The hallway in front of them was perfectly maintained, except for the little sooty footprints tracked across it. They followed them to an alcove where the fox kit was carefully nosing its newest acquisition into place among the other pictures it had stolen. They rested on the floor, propped up against the wall in a neat line. Besides them was a stack of papers and research notes, with the faintest impression of teeth at its edges. And behind those, well, they'd found the professor. They were not going to be able to bring him home to his sister. At least the air here was dry and cold. At least he'd gotten dried up instead of soggy. "I always wanted a murder case," said Ryo faintly. Zuko crouched down. "I don't think it was." There weren't any marks on him that Zuko could see. Just a travel pack that had been carefully emptied of its supplies, with no food left. A water canteen, capped but empty. The fox kit finished positioning its stolen portrait. Professor Zay, smiling, holding his new niece. Professor Zay had sat down in a half-circle of stacked books, the one on his lap still open, and hadn't gotten up again. Said a fox down the hall, an old one with a silvered muzzle. "You," Zuko sighed, standing up. She yipped back, then her jaws wide, and tried again. "Me? You shouldn't be here." "Oh, so now you can talk." "I can," she said, and looked incredibly pleased about it. Behind her back, she wagged her tails. All 3 of them. That was new. "You stole from me," Zuko scowled. Her ears drooped, like she was sorry. like he'd believe she was sorry. "Well," she said, tail tips brushing the floor, "Zhao was about to blow up your ship. It was for safekeeping?" Her ears perked up at her own explanation. Her tails resumed wagging. "That was a month later," Zuko snapped. "Ship?" Ryo-Chojio mouthed to himself, and blew up? Was that before or after Pohai's stronghold? And when had the whole banishment thing happened? And the blue spiriting in general? Ryo hadn't known that his list needed to be a timeline. The older fox's eyes skittered to the body and to her younger cousin, and then back to Zuko. "Perhaps I could show you out," she said, tails swishing hopefully. "I wouldn't want there to be any hard feelings." "Fine," Zuko said, but he narrowed his eyes and kept his arms wrapped over his mother's play. The silvered vixen turned. Ryo took a hesitant step after her. Zuko didn't. Because they couldn't bring Professor Zay back. Not really. But impossible had never stopped him. "And you're picking up the body," Ryo said. "You realize you can't run with a body, right?" Zuko glared back. They followed the silvered vixen and her three tails down a hall, through a reading room where an orangutan sat turning a page with its foot, out another hall. The fox kit, whining, kept pace at Zuko's heels. "No!" Zuko snapped. "You can't have him back. He's not part of your collection." The kit drooped its ears and widened its big eyes. "No!" They entered into a room with long work tables, arrayed around a pool of clear water. At the tables were scholars, probably. They had more or less arms and legs and eyes and feelers than the scholars Zuko had encountered on his avatar hunt, and some were distinctly more furred or carapaced, but the way they hunched over their seats, or gestured to those next to them, or were nearly walled in by the books surrounding them. They were scholars, as surely as Professor Zay had been. Professor Zay had been half an hour's walk from finding water. Zuko didn't know when they'd next find water. Lee lowered the professor's body to the floor. As there was not actually so much violence in the lower ring as the middle ring papers would have people think, Ryo-Chojio had never actually been in foot-nudging range of a corpse. He stared down at the professor. The professor, thankfully, did not stare back. At the table behind him, three spirits looked up from their in-depth examination of, a hat? The kind an upper ring lady might wear? They did their own share of staring. Lee stole the corpse's canteen. "Why didn't you show him where this place was?" he asked, approaching the water. "These are the waters of knowledge," their foxy guide explained, her tail serenely floating behind her. "Once tasted, one's thirst can never be. And there you go. Drinking." The fox tilted her head as Lee swallowed another handful. Then he took the dead professor's canteen and dunked it in. "Glug," the canteen said, into the perfect silence. "Glug, glug." One of the spirit researchers began scribbling notes. "So that's
not safe?
Rio asked. The fox shook her muzzle, side to side, slowly. Expand the sample size, one of the researchers heckled. Rochojio declined.
How are you feeling there?
Rio asked as Lee rejoined them.
Fine,
Lee said, and shoved a canteen at him.
Thirsty?
He'd just run for his life and tiptoed, terrified in the dark, and now there was forbidden water in front of him. Ryochojyo was parched.
No, thank you,
he said. With a shrug, Lee clipped the canteen to his pants and draped the corpse over his back. Again.
So you're not forever thirsty for learning? Or something?
The teenager scowled.
Spirits always say things. Just ignore them.
They kept walking. Behind them, the little fox kit sniffed the waters. Then it stuck out its tongue and expanded the sample size. Ah, one of the researchers said, as the kit finished shaking its muzzle dry. Wan Shi Tong, the most fascinating thing just happened. The kit skittered off. The vixen picked up her pace. Rochojyo did not complain about how thirsty he was, no matter how much running followed. Here, she said, finally, and leapt to press a door latch down with her paws. Lee bolted through. Rio bolted after him, and got a faceful of dead professor, because the prince wasn't moving. They were not in the library anymore. They were definitely not in Ba Sing Se. The vixen said, and shut the door behind them. Has an uncle, Mei Lin finished, sounding the words out in her head, because that was the way grown-ups did it. But more importantly, that was what you had to do when reading secrets. And it had become clear really quickly that this was a list of secrets, or a list all about one really big secret. She'd been saved by a prince. A moment later, she scrunched her nose. She was not going to start sounding like that Jin girl. Prince Zuko had been a sailor.
Uh-huh,
Ryochojyo agreed, as Lee continued to swear like one. The part of his mind that wasn't gibbering added the list of creative invectives to his list. His list needed a lot of updating now. Or not. Rio glanced down the neck of his shirt, at the wanted poster he'd stolen. The face of the Fire Nation's prince glared back. It was pretty recognizable. No further investigation required. Then he stared out at the spirit wilds, which he was trapped in. Just him, Prince Blue Spirit Zuko, and the dead man on Prince Zuko's back.
I want an office job,
Ryochojyo said.
For the rest of my life, I never want to leave my desk again.
Sympathized the fox kit at their feet.